top office says the spirit of Camp David will be adopted along with Camp David principles at the upcoming Trilateral Summit involving Washington and Tokyo, which envisions three-way cooperation and an action plan. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol embarks on his trip to the U.S. today. As the Yoon-Biden-Kishida meeting unfolds, South Korea's intel agency assigns high odds to North Korea carrying out an ICBM launch and other military provocations. South Korea wraps up its working-level talks with Japan over the imminent Fukushima wastewater discharge, details of which will be provided later. It's August 17, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol embarks on his U.S. trip today for the summit with his American and Japanese counterparts, President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida. This first-ever standalone summit will encompass ways to ramp up cooperation between the three countries. Joining me is our Presidential Office correspondent Kim Do-yeon. Do-yeon, so what the top office confirmed today were at least two documents at Camp David. What can you tell us? Well,
you're right, Jung-min. We have been anticipating that there will be a joint statement from the three leaders leading up to the summit, and just hours before the takeoff, the top office has confirmed it. And take a listen to what they're called and what they will reflect.
As the outcomes of this summit, the leaders of the three countries, South Korea, the United States, and Japan, will adopt two documents, the Camp David Principles, that will serve as a sustainable guideline for future trilateral cooperation, and the Spirit of Camp David, which encompasses the vision and implementation strategies of the trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Japan.
Now, expected topics are extended deterrence of North Korea, supporting Ukraine, tackling climate change, and protecting supply chains for the three countries. As a result, we're expecting a specific plan for joint military exercises, more consultative groups on different topics such as cybersecurity, as well as something called an early warning system to protect supply chains. President Yoon also has previously said the three will discuss tech cooperation such as quantum physics, space travel, and artificial intelligence. Now, this comes as the White House earlier also confirmed that in a joint statement, the three countries will set their trilateral cooperation into motion with, quote, ambitious initiatives. White House Indo-Pacific Chief Kurt Campbell also said the documents will include marking three-way talks between leaders, an annual occasion, along with efforts to invest in a three-way crisis hotline between. According to South Korea's top office, one more document could be on the way, but no details were given about it yet.
And Tuan, how is South Korea's top office viewing this summit and the timing?
That's right, and you have mentioned this, that it is significant, and it is evident from the fact that the three leaders are traveling just for this summit for the first time. Now, take a listen to what the top office wants to describe the summit.
The Camp David Summit meeting between South Korea, the United States, and Japan, which will be a focal point in pursuing freedom, peace, and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula and in the Indo-Pacific region, will divide the history of trilateral security and economic cooperation among the three nations into the period before and after August 18, 2023.
There are certain global uncertainties that South Korea is faced with, and strengthening cooperation in security and economy with the U.S. and Japan, who are like-minded, is crucial at this point. North Korea last year carried out at least 65 missile tests and has also fostered its asymmetric capabilities. Also, Pyongyang, Beijing, and Moscow have recently shown closer cooperation, especially when it comes to military. Of course, China has already shown its discontent with South Korea, the U.S., and Japan strengthening ties. While it's likely there will be a mention of protecting the rule-based world order and possibly peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, a Yoon administration official has said the document is not likely to issue words confronting China. But I do want to bring attention to the fact that this all comes as South Korea has been making efforts to put itself on the map as a global pivotal state. In fact, the Trilateral Summit was possible because President Yoon Suk-yeol made the decision to improve bilateral ties with Japan. As we know, he has even partly risked his domestic approval rating in order to get this far with Japan. And Washington has shown full support since the Yoon administration started to make efforts to do so. Now take a listen to what the top office had to say about this.
The combined GDP of these three countries accounts for 1/3 of the global GDP. It can be said that there is significant potential for cooperation in the fields of economy, security, and advanced technology among these advanced liberal democratic nations of South Korea, the United States, and Japan. The collaboration between South Korea, the United States, and Japan cannot be achieved if any one of them opposes it.
And there will be bilateral meetings as well. Just walk us through.
Right, so President Yoon will be landing in Washington, D.C. on Thursday night. He'll rest up for the night and head to Camp David early Friday, where he'll be greeted by his U.S. counterpart and kick off his schedule with a one-on-one with Biden. Then the Trilateral meeting will be held, followed by lunch, where the top office says will be more of a candid setting for the three to speak frankly about ongoing issues. Then in the afternoon, Yoon will sit down with his Japanese counterpart. After that will be a joint press conference around 3 p.m. to wrap things there.
Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon, thank you.
Thank you.
The summit venue, Camp David, is not just a presidential retreat, but it holds diplomatic significance in that it's where key talks have been held in U.S. history. Our Choi Min-jung has this story.
In 2008, former President Lee Myung-bak became the first South Korean president to visit Camp David, the U.S. presidential country retreat, at the invitation of then U.S. leader George Bush. Driving in a golf cart, the two leaders boasted their friendship and promised a stronger alliance. Camp David holds a special meaning in international diplomacy. For more than 80 years, the residence has been used to host summits and intimate diplomatic negotiations. In 1943, the United Kingdom's Prime Minister Winston Churchill attended the first such meeting to discuss the Second World War with U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In 1978, leaders of Egypt and Israel held peace talks mediated by the U.S. in what we now know as the Camp David Accords. On August 18th, President Biden will host South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol and Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the venue for their first ever standalone summit. Biden has visited the retreat dozens of times since taking office, but had never invited a foreign leader. U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said last week that Camp David has been a historic setting for summits and for foreign policy conversations, and added that Biden is looking forward to hosting a discussion of historic proportions. An expert pointed out that the trilateral meeting set to be held at the presidential retreat is in stark contrast to North Korea, China, and Russia's display of solidarity at the recent military parade held in Pyongyang.
It shows South Korea, the US, and Japan do not only pursue military alliances, but also solidarity that pursues universal human values like freedom, peace, human rights, prosperity, and the rule of law. To achieve this, they are strengthening solidarity in a fairly relaxed atmosphere.
All eyes are now on whether Friday's gathering at Camp David will mark a new era in Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo's trilateral cooperation. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea's intel agency says North Korea appears to be preparing for an ICBM launch among other military provocations in time for the Seoul-Washington-Tokyo summit or upcoming Seoul-Washington joint drills. Pyongyang may also launch a military spy satellite in the coming weeks. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Lee Jae-hyun reports.
There could be North Korean provocations following the South Korea-U.S. Japan summit. That's according to South Korea's National Intelligence Service on Thursday in an intelligence committee of the National Assembly. It says that the movement of missile vehicles to transport ICBMs has been spotted in Pyongyang.
Vehicle activity has become unusually active at solid-state missile production plants, so military exercises and launches of tactical nuclear weapons are expected.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reportedly ordered officials to finish the technological preparation for a military spy satellite as one of the regime's top priorities for the second half of the year. The NIS said the satellite will likely be launched in late August or early September to celebrate National Foundation Day next month. The agency also reported that during Moscow Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu's visit to Pyongyang last month, Russia and North Korea seem to have agreed to military cooperation. According to the NIS, Russia might have suggested joint military exercises and sales of munitions to Moscow, while North Korea might have asked for technological support and the lending of Western weapons. Other reports on North Korea include a newly formed temporary task force to deal with dissent as more of the younger generations are expressing negative thoughts about the regime's policies. More deaths due to starvation are being reported in North Korea as well, as the number of deaths from January to July doubled that of the average number over the past 5 years. Pyongyang is also gearing up to open its border to China, as in May it increased the number of trains to and from its neighbor from once a day to twice, and in June opened some customs checkpoints to gradually resume trade. Meanwhile, according to South Korea's Unification Ministry, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has attended 57 public activities in 2023, with 32 in the first half of this year. Military-related events accounted for more than half of the total number. The ministry also revealed the extent of food price rises in North Korea. The price of flour went up 445% and potatoes 87% compared to the first quarter of 2019, the period before the COVID-19 lockdown. 이다현, Arirang News.
The United States has slapped sanctions on the three entities thought to have brokered arms deals between North Korea and Russia. Washington seems to be tightening rein on the regimes just ahead of the UN Biden-Kishida meeting. Lee Seung-jae with more.
The U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Controls announced on Wednesday that it has imposed fresh sanctions against three entities involved in illicit arms deals between North Korea and Russia. The department issued sanctions against Velrus LLC, Defense Engineering LLP, and Versor SRO. The three companies are all either owned or led by Slovakian national Ashot Merkachev. The Slovakian was also sanctioned back on March 30, 2023, for attempting to facilitate arms trade between Pyongyang and Moscow. In its press release, the department stressed that the latest sanctions are a part of the continuing U.S. strategy to identify, expose, and disrupt third country actors seeking to support Russia's brutal war against Ukraine. Speculation that the Kremlin and North Korea might be looking to trade arms comes as Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visited Pyongyang as part of a delegation that marked the 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice last month. Pundits say Shoigu's visit may indicate increasing military cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow. The U.S. Treasury Department also noted that Russia has increasingly been forced to turn to North Korea to continue and sustain its war against Ukraine as it expends munitions and loses heavy equipment on the battlefield. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
As Japan could start releasing wastewater from its Fukushima nuclear power plant as early as this month, Seoul and Tokyo have completed their third and final round of working-level discussions to address concerns here in Korea. Eyes are on whether Korean experts will be included in monitoring the release process. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has more.
Working-level officials from South Korea and Japan have completed their final round of talks on Seoul's requests regarding the release of Fukushima wastewater. A senior government official said in a daily press briefing on Thursday that the third round of discussions was conducted virtually the day before. He said the Korean government will soon provide a comprehensive explanation of the details of what the two sides have agreed upon after both sides conduct further reviews.
We emphasized our stance that the wastewater should be released after building transparency and trust based on monitoring systems by the IAEA.
First Vice Minister Park added that in order to build transparency and trust, the two sides agreed that it is important to continue to communicate. Officials from the two countries previously held two rounds of talks after President Yoon made three requests to Prime Minister Fumio Kishida during their summit on July 12th. First, to include South Korean experts in monitoring the Fukushima wastewater release. Second, to share monitoring information in real time. And third, to halt the release process if the concentration of radioactive materials surpasses agreed upon levels. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
The nation's finance chief promises more support for AI chip data centers as well as startups producing system semiconductors as Korea seeks an economic breakthrough in the high-tech sector. Our Lee Soo-jin has the details.
South Korea's government is taking further steps to not only boost exports but also investment. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho on Thursday held an emergency meeting on the economy with related ministers and said that although the nation's export downturn is starting to level out, the government will continue to strengthen efforts to achieve a quicker economic recovery. One way the government is planning to do this is by promoting promising new industries such as AI semiconductors and urban air mobility. The measures include building data centers that utilize AI chips, as well as increasing financial support for startups that produce system semiconductors. The Finance Ministry also said that it will work with related ministries to build a frequency specific to the UAM industry as part of its efforts to boost Korea's presence in the global UAM market. The battery market is another area that the government is planning to promote. The Finance, Trade, and the Environment Ministries will work together to expand the reuse and recycling of batteries. The government will also make efforts to encourage investment.
Increasing investment along with exports is very important in achieving a quick economic recovery.
To boost eco-friendly investment, South Korea will introduce safety standards so that hydrogen charging stations can be established in areas frequented by a lot of drivers to make hydrogen cars more convenient. The Finance Ministry also said that it will speed up its efforts to create an advanced biotech cluster in Osong, a town that the government has been seeking to develop as a biomedical hub to increase investment in biotechnology. The government will also soon unveil measures in response to China lifting its ban on group tours to South Korea.
We will promptly prepare measures, including making entry requirements easier to meet, as well as developing various tourist programs to attract Chinese tourists.
The Finance Ministry also said efforts will be made across the government to support a complete economic recovery. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Korean stocks have been slipping for 5 consecutive trading days amid China's worsening economic woes. Also, as Beijing is Seoul's biggest trade partner, the South Korean won tumbled against the US dollar yet again on Thursday. Our Ji-young explains.
The South Korean stock market has been on a downward trend for 5 straight trading days now, amid concerns over the faltering Chinese economy. The country's benchmark Kospi fell below the 2,500 threshold during trading on Thursday, but recovered to close at 2,519.85. This continued the drop from the previous session, with most Asian shares declining on Wednesday, following discouraging data from China. Analysts say chances are growing for China to miss its economic growth target of around 5% for this year without additional stimulus measures amid a slumping property market there.
The Chinese economy is sluggish because domestically they have too much debt and they cannot afford active fiscal policy to bring themselves out of the slow economy. They need push from the export sector, but exports are down as well.
He added that this is causing a slowdown in the Korean economy as Beijing is Seoul's biggest trade partner. With sluggish exports, the foreign exchange market here tumbled as well, recording its weakest figure in 3 months against the greenback. The won closed trading on Thursday at 1,342, up 5.1 from the previous session. The expert said the Korean economy will continue to be sluggish unless the Chinese economy picks up.
In order to get beyond it, Korean government can try an expansionary monetary policy, but the current government is very reluctant to do so because it will add to the deficit.
He added that the government can rearrange spending within the budget to use money more effectively to bring the economy out of its current slowdown. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Exports from Korea's auto industry hit an all-time high value worth $40 billion as of the end of July, apparently as demand for eco-friendly cars remains solid. This was achieved in the shortest time ever. Our Park Go-nu tells more.
Exports from South Korea's car manufacturers have reached a record in terms of value in the shortest time ever. This is according to the Industry Ministry's Trends Report for the sector up to the end of July 2023, released on Thursday. Data for auto exports for the year to date shows the total value had surpassed $40 billion by the end of July. This was within just 7 months compared to 2022 when it took 10 months. For July itself, exports recorded $5.9 billion, a 15% year-on-year increase. Although it failed to attain the $6 billion mark seen in the preceding 4 consecutive months, the performance for last month topped that for any other July. As annual car exports in 2022 were the highest on record so far, the government anticipates an even better result for this year as industry conditions remain healthy. Shipments of eco-friendly cars, including EVs and hybrid and hydrogen vehicles, also saw a big increase year-on-year in July. According to the ministry's report, the value of these exports remained at $2 billion for the month, although this was still a 36% leap compared to last July. Since February, exports have been hovering around the $2 billion mark for 6 months in a row. In July, the actual number of environmentally friendly vehicles shipped jumped 10.4% compared to 2022, meaning every 4th vehicle exported was a green car. Sales of eco-friendly commercial vehicles also were the highest ever in July, soaring 93% year-on-year, helped by the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. Korean auto manufacturers have been making the best use of subsidies available there under IRA regulations. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
Hot spells will continue to take over for the next few days. Maximum temperatures will stay at 32 degrees Celsius for Seoul. Excluding parts of the east, sensible temperatures will exceed 33 degrees. On and off showers are expected for much of South Korea tomorrow. Most parts of the country, including central regions and Jeollado province, will see 5 to 30. The coastlines of Gyeongsang-do provinces will see 20 to 70 millimeters of rainfall. Wherever you are, when it starts to rain, it may pour down heavily over a short period of time. And keep in mind that local downpours may bring gusty winds from time to time. Some regions will see winds gusting as fast as 15 meters per second. Also, high waves are expected along the East Coast. At times, seawater may even overtop roadways. It is still highly recommended to stay away from breakwaters and piers. Under partly cloudy skies, Seoul will be starting off at 25 degrees. And rainy spells will dominate nationwide by the daytime. Highs in Seoul will peak at 32. Daejeon, Gwangju, and Daegu all be topping out at 33 degrees. And due to unstable atmospheric conditions, frequent showers are expected for the next few days. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's lying? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Hello everyone, I'm Savitri Panaboke, Ambassador of Sri Lanka to the Republic of Korea. For people like me who is very interested to learn more about Korea, Arirang TV is a valuable source of information. Arirang TV is like a bridge that connects Korea to the rest of the world. I have learned so much about Korea's history, culture and people through Arirang. It is also a leading channel for news and diplomacy and current affairs, and I look forward to learning more about Korea through Arirang TV. Resonating with the world, Arirang.
Oh!
Oh, wow.
Oh! I'm too stressed. Oh
So
no,
this-
not the feet, not the feet!
She moves the body and then what?
Oh!
Oof.
Oh! Oi! Oh, God.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
K-animation, loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. K-animation, watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K-animation, befriending children all over the world.
Hello everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. As called by the U.S. National Security Council Coordinator, the Camp David Summit is expected to boost trilateral cooperation among Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo to a whole new level. The Camp David principles are going to be unveiled, and some media outlets say the focus of these will be on institutionalizing relationships, thereby making it harder for Seoul and Tokyo to reverse course following recent improvements in their ties. However, lingering issues between the two, ranging from historical disputes to the release of Fukushima wastewater, are not easy things to just overlook. How should such matters be dealt with in order to enhance their partnership? For an in-depth analysis, we have invited Professor Choi Hyun-jin of Kyung University into the studio. Professor Choi, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Bo-kyung.
Good evening. And we also have Frank Zanuzzi, President and CEO of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. Good to see you, Mr. Zanuzzi.
Good evening. It's great to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. Now, Professor Choi, first question. On Liberation Day, President Yoon stressed that the independence movement was to build a nation that is free and democratic. How did you see those remarks, given the clear trend of South Korea aligning with Washington and Tokyo?
So as you said, the President Yoon Suk-yeol said we must remember those who gave their all for their freedom and independence and also universal values of our country. And also emphasized that remembering them is the essence of our national identity. And after saying that, he emphasized the importance of trilateral cooperation, especially with Japan, and saying that we are now partners who share values and common interests. And he also said, as security and economic partner, the Korea and Japan will continue to cooperate in a forward-looking manner, contributing to global peace and prosperity together. And also he added to block North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. The three countries, Korea, U.S., and Japan, must closely cooperate on intelligence and share North Korean missile and nuclear information in real time. And this speech is a good indication of the future direction of South Korea's diplomacy. The confrontation between the U.S. and China intensifies, and Russia and Ukraine are at war. And also, we have a very worrying security crisis in front of us called the new Cold War. So in this situation, we must think about who are we going to cooperate to protect our security. And I think President Yoon believes that Japan is the only liberal democracy in Northeast Asia. And we have the similar values and freedom and also human rights standard and the rule of law. And therefore, it is likely that the President Yoon will promote the so-called value-based trilateral alliance in the foreseeable future.
Right, so he was indeed stressing the importance of cooperation with Japan.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, as part of efforts to secure liberal democracy, President Yoon underlined Seoul-Tokyo ties, citing United Nations Commander's 7 bases in Japan, serving as the greatest deterrent keeping the North Korea from invading the South. Now, could you give us more details on this and some insight into what President Yoon intended with his remarks?
Of course. Well, I think President Yoon wisely understands that no realistic defense plan of the Korean Peninsula can be undertaken by multilateral forces without heavy reliance upon naval, air, logistics, intelligence, and other rapid response forces, which are based in the rear area of Japan. This reality has long been true on the Korean Peninsula, but Korean leaders have sometimes been reluctant to acknowledge it, based on the historical sensitivities of forces from Japan being in any way involved in the defense of the Korean Peninsula, even if those forces were indeed United Nations forces or U.S. forces. So I think the president has a clear understanding of the strategic realities on the Korean Peninsula and the need to bolster deterrence in the face of common security challenges. But as Professor Choi has outlined, I think the real significance of President Yoon's commitment to the U.S.-Japan ROK triangle goes far beyond the security challenges specific to the defense of the Korean Peninsula. It's really a global alignment based on shared values in addition to those shared security interests. And I believe that the Camp David summit itself, which will take place very soon, is going to be a celebration not only of the practical requirements for the defense of the peninsula against a growing North Korean ballistic missile threat, but also about what the three countries can do together in the world in the defense of liberal democratic norms and values.
Right, I see. Now let's delve a little bit deeper into the Trilateral Summit then. So Professor Choi, Camp David Principles is expected to include holding these trilateral meetings on a regular basis and also setting up a so-called crisis hotline. What significance such measures have?
Yes, I believe the Camp David Principles are expected to be announced at the Trilateral Summit. And it is likely that these principles include the strengthening of military cooperation and the establishment of a hotline between the three leaders and the obligation to consult in the event of a military crisis and also regularization of a meeting. The idea is to create a separate set of principles in addition to the joint statement to showcase the three countries' willingness to cooperate for security affairs. And I think these principles have three major implications. The first, sending a clear message to North Korea and China that the Trilateral Alliance is strengthening its military and economic ties. And the U.S. President Joe Biden has made strengthening the Trilateral cooperation as a centerpiece of its East Asian strategy. And the three countries are going to take the Trilateral cooperation to the next level in dealing with North Korea's nuclear program and also balancing against China. And secondly, the Biden administration has emphasized the importance of improved relations between South Korea and also Japan, which is essential to contain also China. These principles are intended to prevent the Korea-Japan relationship from slipping backwards in the future. And also lastly, creating a trilateral security coordination system, though not as formal as NATO or Quad. Although the summit is unlikely to produce a formal security treaty with the trilateral security commitment, the three countries are expected to agree on a mutual understanding of defense responsibilities in the region.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, staying on the security cooperation front, according to the Wall Street Journal, training to track and destroy ballistic missiles using radar, satellite, and weapon systems will be part of discussions between the three countries. Now, what are current joint military exercises between the three countries like, and what would such a change mean?
The three militaries share a common technological platform. They have similar Aegis missile defense systems. They are able to work together, in theory, to shoot down missiles coming from North Korea that might be headed toward the Korean Peninsula, toward Japan, or indeed toward the United States. But militaries fight as they practice, and the three nations have never conducted high-level integrated missile defense exercises. So although up till now, most of the military exercises have been focused on maritime security, anti-submarine warfare, search and rescue missions at sea, the transition toward integrated missile defense training, identifying threats inside North Korea, such as road mobile ICBM missile launchers, monitoring them for potential launch, tracking their flight using satellites and other technical means, and then intercepting them before they can reach their target. All of this requires practice by the three militaries, and I think it's a very reassuring signal that the three nations are pursuing a deepening of their military training to respond to what is a growing DPRK ballistic missile threat, including both road mobile ICBM capabilities such as the Hwasong 17 and Hwasong 18 missiles, but also a wide array of shorter range, potentially nuclear capable ballistic missiles in the North Korean arsenal. So this is a welcome bolstering of the three nations' ability to have extended nuclear deterrence against growing threats.
Right, I see. So joint military exercises will indeed go to the next level. Now, Professor Che, during a written interview with Bloomberg News, President Yoon stressed that he is leaving the door open for greater cooperation with two other countries on extended deterrence, and he said that separate consultations will also be possible. Is it hinting at the possibility of having Japan included in the nuclear consultative group?
Okay. To interpret the meaning of a separate consultation is not easy, but I will do my best. The United States and South Korea launched the Nuclear Consultative Group, which is called NCG, last month, as a follow-up to the Washington Declaration, and to jointly plan, consult, and implement deterrence against North Korea. And on the other hand, the United States and Japan also established an extended deterrence dialogue in 2010 and have been holding regular meetings. So this means that there are two separate dialogue and consultation body. One is between United States and South Korea, and the other is between US and Japan. And therefore, the separate consultation that President Yoon mentioned in his interview are believed to indicate a higher body, which is like an umbrella that encompasses these two separate security alliances between the US and Japan and US and Korea, rather than including Japan in the NCG. And therefore, the presidential office of South Korea and also explained that the meaning of a separate consultation is that South Korea is open to trilateral consultation on extended deterrence, which is separate from the NCG. So in general, all these efforts, the two bilateral dialogue and also the separate consultation, and they can be seen as an attempt to create a trilateral high-level security framework to increase its effectiveness.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Che, one more question. It seems like the cooperation between the three countries are becoming more and more comprehensive and extensive. And the first Deputy Director of National Security, Kim Tae-ho, he said that the three countries will launch multiple consultative bodies, not just in the military information sharing, but also on AI and the cyber issues and economic issues as well. How do you see this?
Yes, Kim Tae-ho said that the three leaders will also discuss cooperation in high technology, the artificial intelligence, and also cyber issues for the future growth engines of the three countries, and also joint response to economic security issues such as global supply chain and energy. In an interview, the President Yoon also said that the three countries will plan to further build up the cooperation system to strengthen the resilience of the global supply chain, the conducting joint research and cooperation in key emerging technologies, such as AI, quantum, and space. So what does it mean? So to answer this, I need to mention what was done by White House last week on August 8th. So Joe Biden signed an executive order that was designed to limit investment into China's semiconductor industry, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. And the move was a response to China's decision to curb exports of raw materials used for chips and electric cars. And all these developments represent an ever-intensifying rivalry between the US and China. And therefore, it seems to me that Joe Biden is going to ask Korea and Japan to support and participate in this American policy in high technology rivalry with China.
Right. So would it be safe to say the cooperation, trilateral cooperation, is becoming extensive in order to contain China?
Yeah, right.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, experts say the focus of the Trilateral Summit is to enhance Seoul and Tokyo ties. And according to the Financial Times, the U.S. might push South Korea and Japan to agree to consult with each other in the event of an attack. Now, how do you see the possibility of such a discussion?
Well, I think that indeed those kinds of discussions already have been happening at a working level for many years. But I want to come back, if I might, to the question of containment of China versus competition with China and de-risking. Because as Professor Che has correctly laid out, the U.S., the Republic of Korea, and Japan share values and strategic interests. And one of those interests is that none of them wish to be dependent upon China for the high technology chips or materials, products that are necessary to drive our own technological innovation. And so the friend-shoring of critical capabilities among these three countries and working with other countries like Indonesia and Australia to ensure a reliable supply of rare earth elements and critical minerals and high technology chips for advanced military and civilian technology. But this is a very important strategic development. But I think it's less about containing China and more about beating China in the global race for high technology, AI, quantum computing. So it's a race that is underway. And it's not so much about cheering for China to trip. It's about strengthening the ability of the South Koreans, the Japanese and American companies and governments to win that race. I think on the defense field, the consultations about contingency planning, not just for the Korean Peninsula, but also for other regional contingencies to include peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. But this kind of high-level defense coordination and consultation has been going on in the past. It's going to intensify in the aftermath of this historic Trilateral Summit, which is going to commence tomorrow morning.
Right, I see. Now, Washington's attempt to bring Seoul and Tokyo together is quite getting clear, but there are lingering issues. And so, Professor Che, first are issues regarding history, such as Tokdo Islands, comfort women, and forced labor. How are they affecting ties between these two countries?
Okay. In his Liberation Day speech, President Yoon didn't directly mention those lingering issues. For example, he didn't mention Dokdo Islands during his speech. Instead, he called for future-oriented cooperation and exchanges with Japan. And indeed, Yoon has consistently sent a message of a change in bilateral relation with Japan, resolving the thorny issue of forced labor, and also traveling to Japan before Washington. And with Prime Minister Kishida's visit to Seoul in this May, the normal so-called shuttle diplomacy between the two countries was restored after 12 years of trouble. However, as you said, so there are still some landmines, such as Japan's claim to the Dokdo Islands and also distortion of history in their textbook. And Prime Minister Kishida also sent a ritual offering to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine on this Tuesday, and which is a symbol of a former Japanese military aggression in China and South Korea.
Right.
But I believe now it's Japan's turn to respond to President Yoon's sincerity, and I hope Japan will respond to the move of South Korea with a more sincere attitude to open a new bilateral relationship without provoking historical disputes with its neighbors.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, now another issue the two countries face is Japan's planned discharge of wastewater from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. Now, how are its discussions over this issue going on, and how should such lingering issues be dealt with in order for two countries to go forward?
Thank you for the question. Earlier this year, the Mansfield Foundation took a group of American congresspeople to Fukushima to study the site and to discuss the release of the Alps treated water into the Pacific Ocean. We then traveled together to Seoul, along with Japanese Diet members, to hold some quiet trilateral discussions, U.S., Japan, ROK, about both the Fukushima issue and other issues pertinent to the trilateral relationship. I think the key to the successful release of Alps-treated water from Fukushima is, as your earlier segment described, transparency and accountability and the full participation of Korean experts as well as the international community in observing that process to make sure that it is consistent with international safety standards. Everything I've seen about the planned release of the Alps treated water from Fukushima gives me confidence that the Japanese government is following best practices and that this release poses no threat either to the Japanese people or to anyone else. But I believe that transparency and the participation of Korean experts is critical to the success of this and in building confidence among the international community that the release of the treated water is indeed safe. Let me just say that the South Korean nuclear industry is one of the most advanced, capable, and technologically sophisticated nuclear industries in the entire world. They know that this treated water can be released safely, and I think their voices are very important here because I don't think that the Korean people should listen only to international experts from the IAEA or Japan or the United States. They should also consult their own national experts who understand this process very well.
Right, I see. I cannot agree more. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, we are running out of time, but I would like to ask you this last question. Now, though stalled for now, South Korea, Japan, and China have had regular meetings, and Seoul is actually pushing for a resumption of talks within this year as a host. Now, if this whole Washington-Tokyo meeting becomes regularized, how could Seoul and Tokyo work together at this whole Tokyo-Beijing summit?
Well, very briefly, I think that the United States is a Pacific power, but it is not an Asian nation. And it's essential that Tokyo, Seoul, and Beijing work together on critical issues and the challenges they share, including climate change, pandemic prevention, keeping the oceans safe, making sure that there's enough fish in the ocean for everyone to eat. And so I think these kinds of consultations are essential. They don't pose any threat to the United States. To the contrary, if the U.S., ROK, and Japan can strengthen their trilateral relations, and if Korea and Japan can become in closer alignment, when those two Western democratic allies sit down with the Chinese, those meetings will be more effective if the Korean and Japanese delegates are on the same page. So I welcome the development of a trilateral summitry with China, and I hope that Korea and Japan will coordinate closely in advance of such meetings to ensure good outcomes.
All right, I see your point, and I hope so too. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Well, thank you, Mr. Zanuzzi, for your time and insights. Thank you.
감사합니다.
감사합니다. And thank you, Professor Che, for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Hello.